David Chen had been counting down the days for 3 whole months. Every morning when he woke up at 5:30 to get ready for his construction job, he would look at the calendar hanging on his small apartment kitchen wall and smile. Just 20 more days, then 15, then 10. Today was finally the day he had been working so hard for. His 8-year-old daughter Lily was turning 9 tomorrow, but tonight was going to be their special celebration. David had saved every extra dollar he could find. He skipped his usual coffee shop visits, brought peanut butter sandwiches to work instead of buying lunch, and even picked up weekend shifts when other guys called in sick. All of this was for one special evening at Romano's, the fanciest restaurant in the city. David wasn't the kind of man who usually cared about fancy places. He was happy with pizza and burgers most of the time, but Lily had been talking about Romano's ever since her friend Jessica mentioned going there for her birthday last year. Lily would press her face against their car window every time they drove past the elegant building with its golden lights and red carpet entrance. "Daddy, do you think we'll ever eat somewhere that fancy?" she had asked him one evening while they shared Chinese takeout on their old couch. That question had planted a seed in David's heart. His little girl deserved to feel special, to experience something magical. He had been raising Lily alone for almost 6 years now, ever since her mother decided that being a parent was too hard and left them both behind. David often worried that he wasn't giving Lily everything she needed, especially the kind of experiences other kids seemed to have. So he made the reservation 3 months ago, right after Lily's friend told her about Romano's. The woman on the phone had sounded a bit surprised when he gave his name and asked for a table for 2. She asked him twice if he was sure about the date and mentioned that Romano's had a dress code. David assured her that wouldn't be a problem. The truth was, David only owned one good suit. He had bought it 5 years ago for a wedding and had worn it maybe 3 times since then. It was a simple black suit from a discount store, nothing fancy, but it was clean and pressed. He had even bought new shoes last week, though they were still the cheapest dress shoes he could find that didn't look completely terrible. Lily had been so excited all week that she could barely sit still. She had picked out her best dress, a pretty blue one that David had bought her for school pictures last year. She practiced sitting up straight and using her napkin properly, just like she had seen in movies. "Daddy, do you think they'll have those tiny fancy foods?" she asked while brushing her teeth that morning. "I think they might, sweetheart," David replied, though he honestly had no idea what to expect. He had looked at Romano's menu online, and the prices had made his stomach flip. One meal there cost more than what he usually spent on groceries in a week, but seeing Lily's excitement made it all worth it. As they walked up to Romano's entrance that evening, David felt his palms getting sweaty. The building looked even more impressive up close. Expensive cars lined the street, and well-dressed couples walked in and out of the golden doors. David straightened his tie and took Lily's hand. "Ready, birthday girl?" he asked. Lily nodded eagerly, her eyes wide as she took in all the fancy decorations and soft lighting. They stepped through the heavy glass doors into a world that felt completely different from anything David had ever experienced. The floors were marble, the walls were covered in expensive-looking paintings, and soft classical music played in the background. Everyone around them looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. David approached the front desk where a tall, thin man in a perfect black suit stood looking at a large reservation book. The man's hair was slicked back and he wore an expression that suggested he smelled something unpleasant. "Good evening," David said politely. "I have a reservation for 2 under Chen." The man looked up from his book and his eyes immediately traveled from David's face down to his shoes and back up again. His gaze lingered on David's hands, which were clean, but showed the permanent calluses and small scars that came from years of construction work. "Chen," the man said, flipping through his book with exaggerated care. Chen, I'm afraid I don't see any reservation under that name." David felt his heart skip. "I made it 3 months ago. Chen, party of 2 for 7 o'clock tonight." The man continued flipping pages, though David noticed he wasn't really looking at the book anymore. Other customers behind them were starting to notice the holdup. "Sir, I've checked thoroughly and there's simply no reservation under that name. Perhaps you made it at one of the other restaurants in the area." David knew this wasn't true. He had the confirmation number written on a piece of paper in his wallet. and he had called twice to confirm the reservation. But standing there in his discount suit surrounded by people in clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent, he began to doubt himself. Lily squeezed his hand and looked up at him with confused eyes. "Daddy, what's wrong?" The man at the desk leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice, though not enough that nearby customers couldn't hear. "Perhaps I could suggest Tony's Diner down the street. They're very accommodating for families, and I believe they have a children's menu." David felt his face burn with embarrassment. He looked around and noticed that several well-dressed diners had stopped their conversations to watch what was happening. A woman in diamonds whispered something to her husband, who chuckled quietly. "But Daddy, you said we were going to eat at the fancy place," Lily said, her voice getting smaller. David knelt down to Lily's level, trying to block out the stares and whispers around them. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart. Maybe there was a mix-up with the computer or something." But even as he said it, David could see the disappointment spreading across his daughter's face. Her shoulders slumped and her excited smile faded away. All those weeks of anticipation, all her careful practice with table manners, all her dreams of feeling like a princess for one night, it was all crumbling right in front of him. The man at the desk had already turned his attention to the next customers, a couple in expensive clothes who were greeted with warm smiles and immediate seating. David stood up, feeling smaller than he had in years. He put his arm around Lily's shoulders and started to guide her toward the door. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go find somewhere else special to celebrate." As they walked back toward the entrance, David caught a glimpse of himself in one of the restaurant's many mirrors. He saw what everyone else saw, a working man in an ill-fitting suit clearly out of place among all the wealth and elegance. For a moment he wondered if the man at the desk had been right. Maybe this wasn't the place for people like them, but then he looked down at Lily, walking beside him with her head down and her special dress suddenly seeming less magical, and David felt a surge of anger, not at his daughter, never at her, but at a world that would crush a little girl's dreams just because her father worked with his hands instead of sitting behind a desk. They were almost at the door when something unexpected happened that would change everything. Catherine Morrison had been sitting at table 12 for exactly 43 minutes, and she knew this because she had been checking her watch every few minutes out of habit. At 72 years old, Catherine had developed many habits over the years, and eating dinner alone at Romano's every Friday evening had become one of them. She didn't particularly enjoy the food here. In fact, she found most of it too fancy, and not nearly as satisfying as the simple meals her late husband Robert used to make for her. But Romano's served a purpose that had nothing to do with the food. It was a place where she could sit among other people without having to talk to anyone, where she could pretend for a couple of hours that she wasn't completely alone in the world. Catherine had been coming here every Friday for almost 2 years now, ever since Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack that left her with more money than she knew what to do with, and a house that felt too big and too quiet. The staff knew her by now, and they always gave her the same corner table where she could watch other diners without being too obvious about it. Tonight had started like any other Friday. Catherine had arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, ordered her usual salmon with vegetables, and settled in to watch the couples and families around her. She found it strangely comforting to observe other people's happiness, even if it reminded her of what she had lost. But something different was happening, near the front of the restaurant, and Catherine found herself paying closer attention than usual. A man and a little girl had walked in, and even from across the room Catherine could see how excited the child was. The little girl kept looking around with wide eyes, taking in all the fancy decorations and elegant atmosphere. The man was clearly trying his best to fit in. His suit wasn't expensive, Catherine could tell that much, but it was clean and pressed. He stood up straight and spoke politely to the host at the front desk. Catherine had spent enough years in business to recognize someone who was pushing themselves out of their comfort zone for something important. Catherine watched as the conversation at the front desk began to take a troubling turn. She couldn't hear the exact words from where she sat, but she could read body language better than most people. The host was making exaggerated gestures as he flipped through his reservation book, and his expression was one Catherine recognized all too well, the look of someone who had already decided that certain people didn't belong. The little girl seemed to sense that something was wrong. She moved closer to her father and kept looking up at him with questioning eyes. Catherine felt her chest tighten as she watched the scene unfold. Other diners had begun to notice the commotion as well. Catherine saw a woman at table 6 lean over to whisper something to her husband, who turned to look and then chuckled quietly. A couple at table 3 had stopped eating entirely and were openly staring. Catherine felt her face flush with anger, not at the father and daughter, but at the cruelty of the situation. She had seen this kind of thing before, of course. In her 40 years of building her business from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire, Catherine had encountered plenty of people who judged others based on their appearance or their background. She had been on the receiving end of such treatment herself in the early days, when she was just a young woman, trying to make it in a world that didn't think she belonged in boardrooms. But watching it happen to a child made something fierce awaken in Catherine's chest. She could see the exact moment when the little girl realized that their special evening was falling apart. The child's shoulders sagged, and her excited smile disappeared. Catherine thought of her own childhood, of times when adults had crushed her dreams with their small-minded thinking, and she felt a familiar fire building inside her. The host was now openly dismissing the father and daughter, gesturing toward the door and speaking in a tone that was clearly meant to be heard by other customers. Catherine watched as the man knelt down to comfort his daughter, trying to explain what was happening in a way that wouldn't completely break her heart. That was the moment Catherine made her decision. She had spent 2 years sitting quietly at her corner table, watching other people live their lives while she slowly faded into the background. She had become comfortable being invisible, safe in her loneliness. But seeing this little girl's disappointment sparked something in Catherine that she hadn't felt since Robert died, a sense of purpose. Catherine stood up from her table, her napkin falling to the floor as she moved. Several nearby diners turned to look at her, surprised by the sudden movement from the quiet woman who usually sat alone without drawing any attention to herself. She walked across the restaurant with the kind of confidence that came from decades of making difficult decisions and standing up for what was right. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, and conversations began to quiet as people realized something unusual was happening. The father and daughter were almost at the door when Catherine reached them. Up close, she could see that the little girl was fighting back tears, trying to be brave for her father. The man looked embarrassed and defeated, but he was still holding his daughter's hand gently and speaking to her in a kind voice. "Excuse me," Catherine said, her voice clear and strong enough to carry across the nearby tables. The father turned around, surprised to find an elegantly dressed older woman standing behind them. Catherine could see the wariness in his eyes, probably expecting another person to tell them they didn't belong. "I couldn't help but notice what happened just now." Catherine continued, speaking directly to both of them but focusing especially on the little girl. "I'm sitting all by myself over there, and I was wondering if you two might like to join me for dinner." The father stared at her in shock. "I'm sorry, what?" Catherine smiled at the little girl, who was looking up at her with curious eyes. "I'm Catherine, and I eat here every Friday night, but it gets pretty lonely eating by yourself. Would you like to be my dinner guest tonight?" Before the father could respond, the host appeared beside them, his face flushed with panic. Apparently he had recognized Catherine and realized who he was dealing with. "Mrs. Morrison," he said. Quickly, his entire demeanor changed. "I was just helping these folks with their situation. It seems there was a mix-up with their reservation, but I'm sure we can work something out." Catherine turned to face the host, and her expression was calm but unmistakably firm. "There's no need to work anything out. They'll be dining with me tonight at my table." The host's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Right away. Let me just find them a proper table for 3. "Table 12 is fine," Catherine said. "It's where I always sit, and it has an excellent view." She turned back to the father and daughter, her expression softening. "That is, if you'd like to join me. I understand if you'd prefer to go somewhere else after all this." The little girl tugged on her father's sleeve and whispered something in his ear. Catherine saw him hesitate, probably wondering why a stranger would want to help them, probably worried about accepting charity from someone he didn't know. But the little girl's excitement was returning, and Catherine could see the father's resolve weakening as he looked at his daughter's hopeful face. "Are you sure?" he asked Catherine quietly. "We don't want to intrude on your evening." Catherine laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh she had produced in months. "Trust me, you wouldn't be intruding, you'd be doing me a favor." The walk to table 12 felt like the longest 30 seconds of David's life. He kept expecting someone to stop them, to tell them it was all a mistake, that people like him and Lily didn't really belong at a table with someone as clearly wealthy and important as Catherine Morrison. But nobody stopped them. In fact, the entire restaurant staff seemed to be bending over backwards to make sure they were comfortable. A waiter appeared instantly to pull out chairs for all three of them. Another waiter brought fresh bread and water glasses. The same host who had dismissed them minutes earlier now hovered nearby, asking if there was anything at all they needed. Lily sat up extra straight in her chair, her eyes darting between the fancy place settings and Catherine's kind face. She whispered to her father, "Daddy, is this really happening?" David squeezed his daughter's hand under the table. He was still trying to process what had just occurred. One minute they were walking out the door in defeat, and the next minute they were being seated at the best table in the restaurant as honored guests. Catherine seemed to notice their overwhelmed expressions. "First time at Romano's?" she asked gently. "Yes, ma'am," David replied. "We've been planning this for months. It's Lily's birthday tomorrow." Catherine's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Tomorrow? How wonderful. How old are you turning, Lily?" 9, Lily said quietly, then added with growing confidence, "My daddy saved up money from his work so we could eat somewhere really fancy for my birthday." David felt his cheeks redden. He didn't want Catherine to think they were poor or looking for sympathy. "I work construction," he explained. "Nothing wrong with honest work, but it doesn't pay quite as much as some jobs." Catherine nodded approvingly. "My late husband always said that people who build things with their hands build the foundation of everything else." He had great respect for construction workers. Something in the way she said it made David relax slightly. Catherine wasn't looking down on him or judging his profession. If anything, she seemed genuinely interested. The waiter approached their table with menus, and David's stomach dropped when he saw the prices again. Even though Catherine had invited them to be her guests, he felt uncomfortable letting a stranger pay for their expensive meal. Catherine seemed to read his mind. "Please order whatever looks good to you. This is my treat and I insist. It's been so long since I've had dinner companions, especially on such a special occasion." Lily was studying her menu with intense concentration, sounding out the French words under her breath. "Daddy, what's his car got?" "Those are snails, sweetheart," Catherine answered with a smile. "They're actually quite tasty, but maybe we should start with something a little more familiar." Lily's eyes went wide. "People eat snails?" Catherine laughed, and David was surprised by how warm and genuine it sounded. "People eat all sorts of things around the world. When I was your age, I thought eating raw fish was the strangest thing imaginable. Now sushi is one of my favorite foods." "You've eaten raw fish?" Lily asked, fascinated. "Many times. And octopus, and caviar, and all sorts of things that probably sound weird to you right now." David found himself relaxing as he watched his daughter's excitement return. Catherine had a natural way with children, patient and encouraging without being condescending. When the waiter returned, Catherine ordered for all of them, choosing dishes that would be appealing to a 9-year-old while still being special enough for a birthday celebration. She also ordered sparkling apple cider for Lily and wine for herself and David. "So tell me about yourself, David," Catherine said once the waiter had gone. "How long have you been in construction?" "About 15 years now," David replied. "Started right out of high school. I've always been good with my hands and I like building things that last." "Do you work for a company or are you independent?" "I work for Morrison Construction right now. Have been there for about 8 years. David paused, then added, "I've been thinking about starting my own company someday, but that's probably just a dream." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Morrison Construction? That's interesting. No relation to me, of course, but I know the owner. Good reputation." David nodded. "Yeah, they treat their workers fairly. Not all companies do." What kind of projects do you work on? Mostly residential. Houses, apartment buildings, some small commercial stuff. I specialize in finish work. Trim, cabinets, detail stuff that requires patience. Lily piped up proudly. My daddy built my bookshelf all by himself. It's the most beautiful bookshelf in the whole world. Catherine smiled at Lily, then turned. Back to David. You mentioned starting your own company. What's holding you back? David shifted uncomfortably. Money, mostly. Starting a construction business requires a lot of upfront capital. Equipment, bonding, insurance, materials costs. I've been saving what I can, but it's slow going when you're supporting a family. Just the two of you? Catherine asked gently. David nodded. Lily's mother left when she was 3. Said being a parent was too hard, too much responsibility. So it's been just us for about 6 years now. Catherine's expression softened with understanding. That must be difficult. Some days are harder than others, David admitted. But Lily makes it all worthwhile. She's the smartest, kindest kid, I know. Gets straight A's in school, loves to read, helps with chores without being asked. I just want to give her everything she deserves. It sounds like you already are, Catherine said quietly. The food began arriving, and Lily's eyes grew wide at the elegant presentation. Everything looked like artwork on the plates. Catherine showed her how to use the different forks and explained what each dish was. This is chicken, but they've prepared it with a special herb sauce, Catherine explained. And these vegetables are roasted with garlic and rosemary. Lily took careful small bites, trying to eat as properly as possible. It tastes like something a princess would eat, she declared. Catherine laughed. You know, I've eaten at restaurants all over the world, and I think you might be right about that. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally. Catherine asked Lily about school, her favorite books, her friends. She listened with genuine interest as Lily talked about wanting to be a teacher when she grew up, or maybe a veterinarian, or possibly both. Why not both? Catherine said. I used to think I had to choose just one thing to be good at. But life is long, and you can do many different things if you work hard and believe in yourself. David found himself sharing more than he usually did with strangers. There was something about Catherine that made him feel comfortable, like he was talking to a favorite aunt or family friend. She asked thoughtful questions about his work, his dreams for the future, his challenges as a single parent. The hardest part, David admitted over dessert, is worrying that I'm not enough, that Lily needs things I can't give her. Other kids have 2 parents or mothers who can teach them things I don't know how to teach. Sometimes I wonder if I'm failing her. Catherine set down her fork and looked directly at David. Let me tell you something I learned in my 72 years on this earth. Children don't need perfect parents. They need parents who love them, who show up for them, who teach them right from wrong. From what I can see, Lily has all of that, and more. Lily had been quietly working on her chocolate cake, but she looked up at Catherine's words. My daddy is the best daddy in the whole world, she said firmly. He reads me stories every night and makes funny voices for all the characters. And he always keeps his promises. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. Catherine reached, crossed the table and patted his hand gently. You're doing just fine, she said softly. Better than fine, actually. 2 weeks had passed since that magical evening at Romano's, and David still found himself thinking about Catherine Morrison at the strangest moments. While hammering nails into a roof beam, he would remember her gentle laugh. While helping Lily with her homework, he would recall the way Catherine had listened to his daughter's stories with such genuine interest. David had given Catherine his phone number before they parted that night, but he hadn't really expected to hear from her again. Rich people probably did kind things for strangers all the time and then moved on with their lives. That's why he was so surprised when his phone rang on a Tuesday morning while he was eating breakfast before work. David, this is Catherine Morrison. I hope I'm not calling too early. David nearly choked on his coffee. No, not at all. I'm always up early for work. How are you doing, Mrs. Morrison? Please call me Catherine. I was wondering if you might have time to meet me for coffee sometime this week. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. David's mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. Maybe she regretted paying for their expensive dinner. Maybe she thought he and Lily had taken advantage of her kindness. Is everything okay? Did we do something wrong the other night? Catherine's warm laugh came through the phone. Oh, goodness. No. You and Lily were wonderful company. This is about something completely different, something that might interest you. They arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown that afternoon. David spent his entire lunch break wondering what Catherine could possibly want to discuss with him. He changed his shirt twice after work and arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. Catherine was already there, sitting at a corner table with a manila folder in front of her. She smiled and waved him over. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as David sat down. "I know this must seem strange, but I have a proposition for you." David felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of proposition?" Catherine leaned forward slightly. "First, let me ask you something. When you talked about starting your own construction company, how serious were you about that?" "Very serious," David replied without hesitation. "It's something I think about every day. I have ideas, plans, even some potential clients who have said they'd hire me if I ever went independent." Catherine nodded approvingly. "What's stopping you?" David sighed. "Money. Starting a construction business properly requires about $50,000 minimum. Equipment, bonding, insurance, initial material costs, office setup. I've been saving for 3 years, and I have maybe $8,000 put away. What if I told you I might be able to help with that?" David stared at her. "I don't understand." Catherine opened her folder and pulled out several pieces of paper. "After our dinner the other night, I did some research. I called some people in the construction industry, including your current boss at Morrison Construction." David's eyes widened. "You called Mr. Peterson?" "I did. I told him I was considering a business investment and wanted to know about one of his employees. David, he had nothing but amazing things to say about you. He said you're the most reliable worker he's ever had, that your attention to detail is incredible, and that several clients have specifically requested you for their projects." David felt his face flush. "He said that?" "He also said he's been worried about losing you because he knows you have bigger dreams. He told me that if anyone could succeed with their own construction company, it would be you." Catherine pulled out another paper. "So I had my financial team do some research on the local construction market. There's strong demand for quality residential contractors, especially ones who specialize in custom work and renovation projects." David's head was spinning. "Catherine, I don't understand what you're getting at." She looked directly into his eyes. "I want to invest in your business." The coffee shop seemed to go silent around them. David was sure he had misheard. "You want to what?" "I want to provide the startup capital for Chen Construction," Catherine said calmly. $50,000 to get you started, plus an additional $25,000 for the first year's operating expenses." David felt like he couldn't breathe. That's $75,000. "It is." "Why would you do that? You barely know me." Catherine smiled. "David, I've been in business for over 40 years. I built my company from nothing into something worth millions of dollars. I know how to read people, and I know potential when I see it. More importantly, I saw how you handled that difficult situation at the restaurant. You stayed calm, you protected your daughter's feelings, and you maintained your dignity even when you were being treated unfairly. Those are the qualities of someone I want to do business with." David shook his head, in disbelief. "But what if I fail? What if the business doesn't work out? I couldn't pay you back." "That's why it's called an investment, not a loan," Catherine explained. "I would become a silent partner in your business. I provide the startup capital, you provide the expertise and labor. We split the profits according to an agreed percentage." She pulled out a thick document. "I had my lawyers draw up a preliminary partnership agreement. Take it home, read it over, have a lawyer look at it if you want. The terms are very fair. You would retain 60% ownership of the company. I would have 40%. You would handle all daily operations. I would provide business guidance when requested." David stared at the contract like it was written in a foreign language. I can't afford a lawyer. I'll pay for you to have an independent attorney review it, Catherine said immediately. I want you to feel completely comfortable with this arrangement. But why me? David asked again. There must be hundreds of contractors you could invest, and Catherine was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the busy street. Do you know what the hardest part about being wealthy is, David? David shook his head. Loneliness. When you have money, you never know if people like you for who you are or for what you can give them. Most business relationships are purely transactional. But that night at Romano's, you and Lily treated me like family. You didn't know I had money when we started talking. You shared your hopes and dreams with me because you saw me as a person, not as a bank account. She turned back to face him. I lost my husband 2 years ago. We never had children. I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes, but I don't have purpose anymore. Helping you build your business would give me something meaningful to focus on. David felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was offering. I need to think about this. Of course you do. It's a big decision. Catherine stood up and gathered her papers. Take all the time you need, but David, I want you to know something. This isn't charity, this is business. I believe you can make this work, and I believe we can both benefit from this partnership. As David walked home that evening, his mind was racing. The contract felt heavy in his hands, like it contained the weight of his entire future. He thought about all the times he had dreamed of having his own company, of being his own boss, of building something that would provide security for Lily's future. But he also thought about the risks. What if he disappointed Catherine? What if he wasn't as good as everyone seemed to think he was? What if he lost her money and ruined the friendship they had started to build? When he got home, Lily was waiting for him with her homework spread out on the kitchen table. "Daddy, you look funny," she said, looking up from her math worksheet. "Did something happen at work?" David sat down beside her, still holding the contract. "Lily, what would you think if Daddy started his own business?" Lily's eyes lit up. "Like, your own company? That would be so cool. Could I help?" David smiled despite his confusion. "Maybe you could, but it would mean some big changes. It might be scary sometimes." Lily put down her pencil and looked at him seriously. "Daddy, you always tell me that the best things happen when we're brave enough to try new things. Maybe this is one of those times." Out of the mouths of babes, David thought. His 9-year-old daughter was giving him the same advice he had been giving her for years. 6 months later, David stood in front of his brand new office building, still unable to believe it was real. The sign above the door read, "Chen Construction, Quality Building, Honest Work," in bold blue letters. Every morning when he saw it, he had to pinch himself to make sure he wasn't dreaming. The business had grown faster than anyone had expected. Word spread quickly about the new construction company that combined excellent craftsmanship with fair prices and honest dealing. David had hired 5 full-time employees, all skilled workers he had known from previous jobs. They were busy almost every day, working on kitchen renovations, bathroom remodels, and even 2 complete house builds. But the real success wasn't measured just in money, though the business was doing well enough that David had been able to move into a better apartment and start a college fund for Lily. The real success was in the relationships that had grown from that first evening at Romano's. Catherine had become much more than a business partner. She had become family. Every Sunday, David and Lily drove to Catherine's beautiful house on the hill for dinner. The first time Catherine had invited them over, David had been nervous about bringing his daughter to such an elegant home. But Catherine had immediately put them both at ease, showing Lily her library full of books and teaching her how to play chess on the antique set that had belonged to Catherine's husband. "Books are treasures," Catherine had told Lily that first Sunday. "They can take you anywhere in the world, teach you anything you want to know." Now, 6 months later, Lily spent most of Sunday afternoons curled up in Catherine's library, reading stories while the adults discussed business, or simply enjoyed each other's company. Catherine had even converted one of her guest rooms into a special space for Lily, complete with a child-sized desk for homework and walls lined with books appropriate for a 9-year-old. The arrangement had been good for everyone. Lily had the grandmother figure she had never known, someone who could teach her things about being a young woman that David didn't always know how to handle. Catherine had found purpose again, not just in the business but in helping raise a bright, curious child who brought laughter back into her quiet house. David had worried at first that he was taking advantage of Catherine's generosity, but she had quickly put those fears to rest. "David," she had said one evening while they watched Lily play in the garden, "I need you to understand something. You and Lily didn't just save my business investment. You saved my life. I was drowning in loneliness and you both threw me a rope. Tonight was special because they were celebrating two important things. First, it was exactly 1 year since Lily's birthday dinner at Romano's, the night that had changed all their lives. Second, Chen Construction had just landed its biggest contract yet, a custom home build that would keep the entire crew busy for the next 4 months. They had decided to celebrate by returning to Romano's, but this time things were very different. The same host who had turned them away a year ago now greeted them like royalty, practically falling over himself to make sure they were comfortable. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Morrison, young lady," he said with an enormous fake smile. "Your usual table is ready." David caught Catherine's eye and they shared a knowing look. The man's attitude had changed completely once he learned who they were, but his character clearly hadn't. As they walked through the restaurant, David noticed other diners looking at them with respect and curiosity. Catherine Morrison was well known in the city's business circles, and word had gotten around about her new construction company partnership. Several people nodded politely as they passed. But what made David proudest was watching Lily walk through the restaurant with complete confidence. She wore a new dress that Catherine had bought for her, and she carried herself like the intelligent, well-loved child she was. No one would ever again be able to make her feel like she didn't belong somewhere. They settled at their table, the same corner table where Catherine had been sitting alone that first night, and ordered their meal. The conversation flowed, easily, as it always did now. They talked about Lily's school projects, David's work challenges, Catherine's plans for expanding the business. "I have something to tell you both," Catherine said as dessert arrived. "I've been thinking about this for weeks and I've made a decision." David felt a flutter of worry. "What kind of decision?" Catherine smiled at both of them. "I want to make this arrangement official, legal and permanent." Lily looked confused. "What do you mean?" Catherine turned to face the little girl directly. "Lily, how would you feel if I became your official godmother?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? Like for real?" "For real," Catherine confirmed. "I've already spoken to my lawyer about drawing up the papers. If your daddy agrees, of course." David felt his throat tighten with emotion. In the past year, Catherine had attended every one of Lily's school plays, helped with homework when David was working late, and had even taken Lily shopping for clothes and books. She had been acting like a grandmother in everything but name. "I can't think of anything that would make me happier," David said quietly. Lily jumped up from her chair and threw her arms around Catherine's neck. "This is the best news ever. Can I call you Grandma Catherine?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I would love that more than anything in the world." As they sat there in the restaurant where their journey had begun, David reflected on how much their lives had changed. A year ago, he had been a struggling single father with big dreams, but no way to achieve them. Lily had been a little girl who sometimes felt different from other kids because she didn't have a traditional family. Now they were thriving. The business was successful beyond David's wildest dreams. Lily was excelling in school and had the confidence that came from knowing she was loved and valued. And Catherine had found the family she had always wanted but never thought she could have. "You know," Catherine said, wiping away happy tears, "when I invited you to my table that night, I thought I was just helping out a father and daughter who had been treated unfairly." "You were," David replied. Catherine shook her head. "No, I was wrong about that. I wasn't helping you. You were helping me. I had forgotten what it felt like to have people to care about, people who cared about me for who I am, rather than what I have." Lily had returned to her seat but was practically bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, Does this mean we're really a family now? David looked around the table at the two people who had become the most important parts of his world. Catherine, who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Lily, who had taught him that love was the only thing that really mattered in building a good life. "Sweetheart," he said, reaching across the table to hold both their hands. "We've been a family for a long time now. Tonight just makes it official." The same waiter who had served them a year ago approached their table. Back then he had been polite but distant. Tonight he was genuinely warm, having gotten to know them through their regular visits. "Is there anything else I can get for you folks tonight?" he asked. Catherine smiled up at him. "Actually, yes. Could you bring us 3 glasses of your best champagne? We're celebrating." "What are we celebrating, if you don't mind me asking?" "Family," Catherine replied simply. "We're celebrating family." As they raised their glasses in a toast, David thought about all the times he had worried that he wasn't giving Lily everything she needed. Tonight, looking at his daughter's radiant smile and Catherine's joyful tears, he realized that sometimes the best gifts in life come when you least expect them. From the kindness of strangers, who become something much more precious than family. They become chosen family, the people who love you not because they have to, but because they choose to.